She's been trying to get it done for about a month, I think. So she said when Marty said she could come Tuesday, she said, I didn't even say anything.
That's a very old freezer.
Well, apparently so, because she talks about the fact that Nell used to change diapers on the top of it. Trying to get it done for about a month, I think. So she said when Marty said she could come Tuesday, she said, I didn't.
I've got one in my garage that I had in Walterboro. So.
Well, I had one that I bought when we lived in Irmo, and we moved from Irmo in 78, that I got from Lowe's. It was a Holiday brand. It was one of the Lowe's brand. And then I moved it. And when I moved from Roscoe to Wellesley in 2000, let's see, that would have been in 2009. I gave the freezer away. It was still working. If you can believe that.
Well, we bought this one, I guess, back about 1970.
Yep.
It's still doing the job.
Yeah. Well, mine was, I just thought I am not going to, well, I didn't have a good place for a chest freezer. I got an upright. But yeah, it was still going strong. So they really did make appliances that lasted a lot longer years ago.
Yeah, different than today's time.
Yep.
If somebody would like to come defrost my freezer outside.
I told Susan, I remember now that, again, that was one of the things that it was not frost free. And so, you'd have to plan and to bunch stuff up and put it in a cooler or something like that. But once it started breaking loose from the side, you could just use I used to use a screwdriver, and then they'll just pop off the side and fall down in there.
I use a spatula.
Yeah. That would work. Yep. I might have used a spatula too. I'd forgotten, but I think I used a screwdriver sometimes too.
I generally wait the warm weather to do mine.
Well, I didn't do mine in warm weather, so I think I'm gonna have to do it in chilly weather. And mine is an upright, and I found that the best way to do mine is to put pots of hot water in it, and then the stuff falls down.
Yes, I did that too. That does. I mean, it really does work. And the good thing about doing it in the winter is if it's pretty cool, you don't have to worry so much about the food thawing while you're doing it, because
you don't. And let me tell you, it's cold in North Carolina now.
It's not exactly hot here. But all right, well, let's get started. Shall we pray? God, we thank you for this chance to come and to enjoy learning more about your word. We ask that you bless this time and bless us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I'm thinking this is Margaret's week to not be here.
Well, she was still sick earlier this week. So
yeah. She seemed to be doing much better at council the other night, though. But
okay.
She sounded bad last Tuesday when we met.
Well, it lingered, and I don't know that she ever went to a doctor or anything.
No, she didn't.
Well, because Beverly. Look, two of the three things they don't really. Well, actually, like if it was the flu, if it was RSV or COVID, they don't do anything for it really. So,
yeah.
Unless it gets bad, what you're going to do is just suffer through it. So, all right. Well, we are in John 6. The odds of us finishing this chapter today are slim to none. it has 70 verses. But let's go ahead and jump in. Share. All right, we are discussing the feeding of the 5,000 to begin with. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs that he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat down there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festival of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" He said this to test him, for he knew himself what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up, and from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Okay, read through that, and then we will discuss it. All right, so this is likely not an unfamiliar story to you. However, you may notice a few differences that you usually don't, or some things that are often there. So what jumps out at you?
Is it always 2 fish?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I didn't look up, but my version says 8 months, and you said 6. And I mean, that's not a big difference, but it's the first time I've noticed a specific statement about where were they to buy it. I don't remember the thing about how much they would cost.
I'm listening. Keep talking.
I don't remember that specific, but again, I haven't looked at the other one lately either. The other.
Let me get that out. Wait a minute. That's not the one I want.
Okay. And I will make a note in my Bible as to where the other, because I don't I'm sure I could find it pretty quickly in the back, but I don't remember exactly where other accounts of the feeding of the 5,000 is located.
Let me find my gospel parallel book. I found the one that's just in English, but it doesn't include John. There it is. Let's get a little worried. This is the most expensive book that I got in seminary.
I'll
It was about $200 for this book.
And
And
that was really expensive then.
well, but it's also stupid. The reason it was that much money was because it has the Greek text in it as well.
oh,
About a year later, the price of this dropped dramatically, mainly because it was no longer a challenge to print it like that. Because, you know, they didn't have to set anything up. I mean, it's just computer.
right.
But this one was not. I mean, like I said, I mean, I've got computer programs that I could just about print this from. Let me find the table of contents. It doesn't have one. It must be in the back. It is. So,
Are we comparing it to the other versions?
yes.
Okay, in Matthew, he came by boat. He wasn't.
Hang on.
Yeah, I finally found something. Something says Matthew 14.
Yep. And then Mark.
Okay, well
6.
that's helpful. Matthew 14,
Yeah, and Mark 6.
because the way this thing's laid out is not easy to find stuff in. And it skipped right over that.
Yeah, I did find it at the bottom of
Mark 6, bread of life, walking on water, 146. All right. So
it says Mark 6 talks about the gathering up of the pieces. And in Matthew 14, it has to do with the number of people.
okay, here we go. Here's Matthew. Okay, it's only in Matthew and Mark, it's not in Luke.
Okay.
This is Matthew. Then Jesus called his disciples. Hold on, I'll start at the beginning. And Jesus went on from there along the Sea of Galilee, and he went up a mountain and sat down there. And great crowds came to him, bringing them the lame, the maimed, the blind, the dumb, and many others. And they put him at his feet, and he healed them. By the way, this is probably from the RSV. So that the throng wondered, and they saw the dumb speaking, the maimed whole, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have seen me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat, but I am unwilling to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. And the disciples said to him, where will we get enough bread in the desert to feed such great a crowd? And Jesus said, how many loaves have you? They said, 7, and a few small fish. And commanding the crowd to sit down, he took the 7 loaves and fish, and having given thanks, he broke it and gave it to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 7 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. Those who ate were about 4,000 men, besides women and children. And after sending the crowds away, he got in the boat and went to the region of Magadan. All right.
That's not what my Bible says in Luke 14.
That's because that's Matthew.
Matthew 14.
It's
Because
Matthew
it says
15.
5,000.
This is the RSV. Oh, wait. That's the feeding of the 4,000. Hang on.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Hang on.
Yeah, and it
1,000 are fed.
yeah, it was saying 7 loaves and a few fish. And so the numbers are a little different.
Well, no, not only that. I think. Okay, and 146. That's math. Oh, that's what I forgot. Okay. Oh, and when there's actually a bookmark right here, like it is. It's in all 4 gospels. Here's Matthew. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a lonely place apart. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot to towns. As he went ashore, he saw a great throng and had compassion on them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We only have 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowd to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave it to the crowds. And all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of unbroken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Okay. And that's where it ends. Now, looking at Mark. And they went away into the boat to a lonely place by themselves. Now many saw them going and knew them, and they ran there on foot from all towns and got there ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great throng and had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a lonely place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the country and villages round about and buy themselves something to eat." But Jesus answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves have you? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to sit down by companies upon the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. And taking 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave it to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they ate all and were satisfied. And he took up 12 baskets full of the fish, pieces and of the fish, and those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Then we have Luke. And he took them and withdrew apart from the city called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of God, and cured those who had need of healing. Now the day began to wear away, and the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away to go into the villages and country round about, to lodge and get provisions, for we are here in a lonely place." But he said to them, "You give them something to eat." They said, "We have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we are to go and buy food for all these people." For there were about 5,000 men. And he said to his disciples, "Make them sit down in companies, about 50 each." And so they did, and made them all sit down. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke them, and then gave them to the disciples to set before the crowd. And all ate and were satisfied. And they took up what was left over, 12 baskets of broken pieces. Now, as you hear these, one of the important things about when you have parallels is that you look at why, what the differences are, and then you look and you ask yourself, well, why? Why are these different? And so let's look at John and what he says. So the first thing in John that stands out is me finding John in my Bible. First thing that stands out is that Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, to the Sea of Tiberias. This was different in there. So let's look at this. All right, this is the map that we saw last time. Okay, first of all, remember Jesus was just in Jerusalem. And then he went up here. There was one that said he was in Magdala. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
There's Magdala, Tiberias, and Tiberias is over here. But so this is, Jesus came up from Jerusalem to here. All right. And so he could have, he did not get on a boat. It said that he went up a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
No one that I saw talked about the significance of that, other than, where he was. Now, John then said that people followed because of what he had been doing for the sick. And the other three gospels said, basically, at least gave the impression that he was doing it there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That they came to him because of that. And so that's a minor difference, I think. In verse 4, however, now this is significant. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. No one else mentions that. John mentions the Passover 3 times. The other ones, I think, only just once at the end. This is the second time we've heard of the Passover. This, by the way, is also the only time that the Passover is not spent in Jerusalem. And so the Passover is important, because what story do we think of when we hear the Passover?
Yeah.
The Exodus. Okay. And so this entire chapter deals with that. The entire chapter deals with the Exodus. And so as we dig in there, we'll see more and more about the Exodus and how it kind of parallels. So that in John's gospel is significant. Now, it's interesting. John actually gives a little more personality to the disciples. We don't hear, like in the other 3 gospels, it was the disciples.
Right.
They weren't named.
Right.
But apparently Andrew and Philip were the ones that actually got along with people the best, because here and in another place, they're the ones working the crowds to find out stuff. And so they find a young boy, a youth, who has food. And in some of the gospels, it sounded like they had it on them already. In other ones, they went out to find it, and that's what they found. So, that's kind of what we have going on at this point, is that they've located food, which is stupid. Let's be honest. And they say as much. Here we got this, but the commentator makes a point to say this, that maybe instead of talking about our scarcity, bring to Jesus what you got and watch what he can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very good lesson from this, is that they bring to Jesus what they've got and then watch what he does. Watch what he does with it.
Well, I had wondered too why in John he mentioned that this young boy has the fish and the loaves, but the others didn't mention who had it. And maybe that's another case where the young shall lead them or guide them.
Maybe, or the writer had a different memory.
Yeah. And wonder where he came from that he had the.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, like, some of these you wonder, well, is it just because he was there? I mean, like, maybe he remembered a little better than others, or maybe that was just him adding a detail, because it doesn't seem significant that who had it, but now in all of them make the people sit down. Every single one of them had the people sit down. And it also talks about there being grass there, which is odd to me. I don't know the reason, but I'm sure there is one.
Well, when we were in Israel, we saw very few places that had grass, and generally it was either near an aqueduct or near the river or lake.
Well, yeah, and this would be near the Sea of Galilee.
So I wonder if that was just pointing out, because, if they had been somewhere else, there wouldn't have been grass. So that was interesting to the writer.
Oh. And I just took my picture of me reaching up to try to get that. So then we see Jesus do the miracle. And what is it that makes the miracle happen? And it is in all four Gospels. Verse 11. It's verse 11.
Gave thanks.
Yeah. Yep, he gave thanks. Now, it is interesting that, again, the most sacramental of the four Gospels doesn't go into almost the sacramental liturgy. And when he had blessed and broke, because, I mean, don't we hear that? Yeah.
Twice.
The other three Gospels had that. John doesn't. He just said when he had given thanks and distributed it. They had as much as they wanted. And now it's also interesting that it's always 12 baskets full.
Yeah.
Then that could, some, probably the ones in that are in the, what am I trying to say? The companies, that very well may look at the 12 tribes of Israel, because that's kind of how they were divided in Exodus, but for John, it's likely that it talks about the 12 disciples. Mm-hmm. Especially in this chapter, because at the end of the chapter, there's only 12 left. And so it's sort of like there's enough for you. There's enough left over. Now,
well, and I looked at it, each disciple took a basket and gathered it. And so that's how they're.
I've heard that too, that basically it was just made sense. I mean,
I'm just practical.
Yeah, well, and then now this one is not in any of the other Gospels. They deem him to be the prophet, the one coming into the world. And so what do they want to do?
Make him king.
They want to make him king. And so at this point, you know, in the last one, and in the last chapter, at the end of it, Jesus kind of had to split, or was it the last chapter or the one before? It was what? Let's see what. They were. Jesus was. I mean, like he ticked a bunch of people off, and they were kind of coming after him. Right? You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And so here, Jesus has to get away. Why? Because they want to make him their king. And what they wanted was something political. They you know, they wanted him to, I mean, somebody that could do this. Imagine. He's the one God sent. Let's go take on Rome. Let's go get Jerusalem back.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's what they thought the Messiah was going to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And so for them, the Messiah and the king were basically one and the same.
Right.
And so, you know, that's, I mean, but that's the feeding of the 5,000 in John. But now you say yours says 8 months' wages.
Did yours say 6? I thought that was weird because, I mean,
It was 200 denarii.
right now, now that's what I've heard before. I don't think I'd ever seen it in.
Okay. Well, all right. The denarius will now. So 200. It would probably be 7 months' wages, quite honestly,
Yes.
because
It would be closer to 7 than 6, because
Yeah.
6 would give you
a denarius is a daily wage. And so the
Yeah,
365 denarii would be a yearly wage. 200 is, math people,
Oh,
it's over half.
it's over half, but I don't think it's an eighth. I think it's more of a seventh.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the first time that because when we're reading from 2 different versions,
Yeah.
first one just had something so obviously different, you know. That was what sort of struck me, is that they've, you know, that they've been a little bit different, but there's a difference in 6 and 8. Now, that's what I've always, you know, heard. I don't know that I've noticed but it was just when you read it, I thought, well, 6 and 8, I don't see why there would have been a difference.
See, eight would be 240.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And 6 would be 150, right? Yeah. Well, 180.
6 times, yeah.
Yeah. Well, but
Yeah.
350, 365. Yeah. This would be 132. Would be 6 months.
It was just sort of unusual that there would be.
At the end of 6 months, it's 180.
Okay.
At the end of 6 months, I don't know. Well, it's just neither. I mean, it's probably 7. We'll say 7. We'll split the difference.
And rewrite the gospel.
Well, we're not rewriting the gospel. They did. The gospel said 200 denarii.
Right.
Yeah. That we didn't have to argue about.
Yeah.
That was because I you know, it was just sort of
It's churchy people, not mathy people. Trust me, that's what happened. We are a different breed.
probably.
Okay, Stephen, is is this the only one that mentions the boy giving the,
Yes.
okay, that's what I thought.
Which is interesting because Vacation Bible School always has the boy do it.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
I mean, that's actually the most famous one.
Yes.
That is the most famous part of that version, but the one we know is probably a combination of all of them.
Yeah. And I actually was at a presentation of a dramatic presentation of the feeding of the 5,000 once. And it was the fact that the mother gave the little boy something so he would have something to eat when he was going to go and see Jesus.
I think I've seen that. Yeah.
I have too.
Yeah, that's not biblical, but
No, it's
yeah.
not. That's to make it sort of like a parable, make it more meaningful to us.
Exactly. All right, well, let's move on. Let's see, share screen. Wrong one. All right. Jesus walks on water. When evening came, the disciples went down to the sea and got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were terrified. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they wanted to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land toward which they were going. So read through that real quick, and then we will chat about that. All right, we ready?
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I want to show you a map of what we're talking about to make this a little clearer. So this is the Sea of Galilee, okay? And so Jesus was probably somewhere around here, right? And so he went to here. I don't know. Can y'all see my mouse move when I do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So he went to Capernaum. And so that is basically he's cutting that off right there. And that cannot be right.
Why can't it be right,
No, I'm
Stephen?
looking in the corner where it says the scale of miles,
Oh,
and that's 5 miles. No. Well, it may be there, but well,
if you go around
you know
the
what?
other way, it's
but you know what though? Looking at this, I guess the towns wouldn't be that far apart from each other, would they?
mm-mm.
Dale looks about right from Capernaum to Tiberias.
Well, and it said about 3 or 4 miles, and
Yeah.
so that'd be about halfway, a little more.
Around halfway there when they're going.
Yeah. And they would not have gone around the.
No, you wouldn't have followed the coast. I mean,
because that would be long.
yeah.
Well, it's stupid. I mean, yeah. I mean, what's the point?
Stephen, when we were in Israel and on the Sea of Galilee, our guide told us that storms blow up very quickly because of the topography of the land.
Yeah.
And that was one of the problems that sailors had. They couldn't be forewarned that a storm was coming. It just sort of appeared.
Well, and something I learned today were the Jewish people were not a seafaring bunch.
Mm-mm.
we kind of think of it because a number of Jesus' disciples were fishermen, but notice where they're fishing. I mean, they're not on the ocean.
Right.
They're in a lake.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so, you know, they were fishing the Jordan, the Sea of Galilee, and it's a sea, but it's smaller than Lake Murray. You know, I mean, and so that the fact that they were crossing to the other side. When do we hear about Jews crossing from one place to the other side of water?
Exodus.
But they're not exactly crossing to the other side.
They're really not. They're
They just
they're
crossed the
cutting it off. Yeah. But again, that also what Mom said lends to the fact that all of a sudden the sea became rough and the strong wind was blowing. And so now one of the Gospels, somewhere I read that the boat just sort of had floated out there while they waited. This one says that they were rowing to the other side, and Jesus in some of the other Gospels tells them to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go on. I'm gonna wait here.
Right.
John's Gospel, he doesn't say that. And so, and there's also a lot more conversation in some of them. In one of them, he invites Peter to get out of the boat and come to him. That's not here.
Right.
And the reason for that is because the focus of this, especially in John's Gospel, is who Jesus is. I don't care what Peter did. This is about who Jesus is, and Jesus is the one that can walk on water.
Right.
Moses parted the Red Sea. Jesus said, screw it, and just went on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And see, this raises him above Moses. He's not just some prophet. He's the word that became flesh.
Yeah, because Moses is not the one that parted the Red Sea. God parted the Red Sea.
Right. Right. Well, and that's true too. God didn't walk. Well, God did walk on water, but you're right. God parted the Red Sea through Moses holding something up. But here, Jesus is the one that's
walks on water.
That's defying nature.
Right.
And so, but it's interesting. They were going to take him into the boat, but they were already there.
Well, were they terrified when they saw this person? It says they saw Jesus, like they knew it was Jesus. Were they terrified because they didn't know it was Jesus? Or
In the other Gospels, it actually says that.
Walking on water.
Yeah, in the other Gospels, it says they were terrified for they didn't know it was him.
Yeah.
I think we can assume that. Well, I don't know though. Even if I knew it was Jesus, I'd be freaked out if the dude was walking on water.
On water, you
Yeah.
evidently knew where the rocks were.
I mean, that's sort of, finding out who it is buries the headline. He's still walking on water.
Right.
And so, but here is this Jesus that has the power over nature.
Right.
That is more than that. And so, first we, if they hadn't figured stuff out yet, they're starting to clue in now. It's like, okay, they're talking about this on the boat. Did anybody catch that he just fed everybody with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? Did y'all see that? And then all of a sudden, well, I'm sure at some point, do y'all really think we should have just left him there? I mean, how's he going to get to where we are? And the next thing they know, oh, here he comes.
Well, I thought it was interesting that said they take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the land. It was almost like it was teleported to the land when he got on it.
Yeah, the purpose of the journey was over. But and that's in the other gospels too for some reason. But like one of them says they were going to take him in, but they were already there. And I don't know really the point of that at all. But it is what it is, I guess. Well, I do not think that we should move on, quite honestly, because the next part is kind of like the rest of it's kind of one thing. It's all the bread of life stuff, that we take 4 or 5 weeks every 3 years talking about, because the lectionary writers thought, oh, here's a good idea. Let's give pastors the same thing to talk about for 3 weeks, 4 weeks in a row.
Is this the year of the bread?
It was. I'm pretty sure we just did it.
Okay.
They do it in the summertime so we can try to take a vacation at some point during that. But anyway, all right, folks. Well, I will see you soon. And we will be here again next week. And so I look forward to seeing y'all then.
Okay.
Y'all take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.